Hi everybody, welcome back to Between the Lines. My name's Julian, I'm an obsessive reader and used book collector, and welcome to my holiday book haul. This one's going to be a bit different from my typical monthly book hauls. If you've been following those, it's been mostly just me going out to used bookstores, picking up a bunch of stuff that's on my list, especially a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. But today, because Christmas just happened, I did get a few books as gifts, so I will be talking about them, and this is going to be my first book haul where it's not just used books. There's actually going to be a mix of used books, some new books, and finally some indie books as well. Getting into indie books has been one of my goals in starting a booktube channel. That whole sphere of authors out there was something I had no idea of. I never really dipped my toe into the world of indie and self-pub, but now that I'm part of this community and hearing about all these amazing stories that are out there, I've begun slowly adding them to my TBR, and I've actually gotten a couple of indie books that I'll be talking about today. So let's get into it. So let's just start off with the used books, just following tradition. I'll just talk about the couple of used books I picked up. I recently went to that small town I've talked about in my past book hauls, and I managed to find a couple of good books that were on my list there, starting with Night Shift by Stephen King. So Night Shift is one of Stephen King's major short story collections. I'm not sure if it's the first of them, but it's definitely been the one that's eluded me the most at used bookstores. I expected to find this so many times going out on my book hauls, but I've never been able to, and I've been saving it because I knew I'd be able to find it so much cheaper than retail, although it's really not expensive at all retail. I was just being picky. This one's got some of his classic short stories like Children of the Corn, Jerusalem's Lot, One for the Road, and I've really enjoyed the short fiction of Stephen King so far in the past. I've collected, I think, including this one now, all but one of his short story collections, and so I like to just pick up one of these every once in a while, read a good short story. The last one I read of his was 1408 and I enjoyed it. So this is going to be one that'll sit on my shelf, and whenever I kind of feel like picking up a quick, scary story, it'll be right there for me. Next, we have Four Great Plays by Henrik Ibsen. So this is technically not a book, it's actually a collection of plays by the famous playwright Ibsen, and I had this on my wish list for a while, but I never really made the jump to actually purchasing it. I don't read plays all that often. I've read a few Chekhov plays in the last couple of years, and Ibsen is another one of those classics of whom I've never read any of his plays, so getting into this is something I've been looking forward to for a while, and since it was just there at the used bookstore, I figure might as well buy it. I think it was like $3, so now I finally have a collection of his plays, and the one I'll probably read first is A Doll's House. That's the one I've heard about the most, and I would at least like, if not possible to actually watch the play, maybe to watch a recorded version of the plays first before actually reading them, because that's the medium in which they're supposed to be shown, and try to interpret it through that way first before reading it just as it is on the page. And the last of my used books is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. So this is a very famous novel by Italian author Umberto Eco that is a mix of things that I really enjoy, and I'm very curious to see how it's going to work out. So this book is very well known, and I believe it's about a group of Italian monks sometime in medieval Italy, and a murder happens in their monastery, and it's sort of a mix of murder mystery and philosophical exploration of the role of the church and religion, and those are two subjects I'm very interested in, and because this book is such a classic and people rave about it, it'll be one that I'm very curious to see how it plays out, blending the kind of high-minded concepts of the exploration of religion and sort of the murder mystery plot that it's supposed to follow. So that's it for the used books I picked up for myself. Now let's go into the books I got for Christmas. There's a couple of them here, and these don't necessarily fall into the classification of used or indie books, so they're kind of just in their own new-ish category, starting with The Collected Stories of Raymond Chandler. This is a big one. This is a collection of short stories that I've wanted to read for a while, but never just found the right time to pick this up for myself. So Raymond Chandler is the famous American crime author who wrote stories like The Long Goodbye, The Big Sleep. He's the creator of the hard-boiled detective character Philip Marlowe, who was made famous by Humphrey Bogart in The Big Sleep movie. And as it stands right now, he's my favorite crime author. I love noir, detective fiction, mystery fiction, especially from this era. His prose is just so good, and it's so clearly clearly represents that noir detective vibe and storytelling and the attitude and the slang. I've really enjoyed his novels so far and count those two that I've read among the best of the crime fiction I've read. So to read his short stories is something I've wanted to get into for a long time. I believe there's 20, maybe 25 of those in here. This will be another one probably where it sits on my shelf, and when I feel like it, I'll jump into a story. Not necessarily read this all the way through. That's not how I do short stories. But all in all, a book I'm very happy to have on my shelf. Next up, we have The World of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and Teresa Patterson. This is a book that I think is gonna have to sit on my shelf for a little bit before I actually start reading it because of spoilers. I believe this is just an exploration of the world of The Wheel of Time and the lore, the different characters and the factions within, and I'm only done book 2. This is my first read through of The Wheel of Time. I have no knowledge of the series beyond The Great Hunt, so this is maybe gonna have to sit on my shelf until I'm done the series and can go through it without spoilers. I actually did ask my girlfriend to kind of skim through it and see if there's anything that goes beyond that point in the story, and she said there's probably spoilers, so I think I'm gonna have to wait, but I'm super happy to have this. My brother works at a bookstore and he managed to buy this for me, and I'm so happy because one day when we were there together, I pointed it out how I wanted it, but you know, it wasn't the right time to buy it, so I'm happy he took note of that. But it's a beautiful hardcover edition that I'm very happy to have on my shelf, and thank my brother a lot for paying attention when I told him that I really wanted this. And the last one in this category, we have Tolkien's The Silmarillion with illustrations by Ted Naismith. This is an absolutely gorgeous version of The Silmarillion. The Silmarillion was a book that I read last year for the first time and absolutely fell in love with. It took me a month to read just because I was going so deep into it and trying to savor it and enjoy it. And now having the illustrated hardcover edition on my shelf is something I really appreciate. My brother's partner actually got this for me. And now I have 3 copies of The Silmarillion. I have my mass market paperback that I picked up for myself when I first read it. I have a trade paperback, I believe, that a friend of mine was giving away and didn't want to read, so I took it off them, and now I have this beautiful hardcover edition. And although I'm not quite ready to reread it so soon, having just read it last year, the day I do reread it, I'm definitely going to read it through this beautiful hardcover edition, and I'm just so happy that I have it because this was a long-term wish list one that I wanted to buy for myself, but to have it now is something super unexpected, and I'm so grateful for that. So next up, we have a book that I did receive for Christmas, but is also an indie book, and that's Escaping First Contact by T.S. Byer. So this is a book I've seen pop up a lot on BookTube. It's actually written by a fellow booktuber from Sound and Fury Book Reviews. You may have come across that channel in the past, and if you have, you may know about this book. So this is a sci-fi book I've heard a lot about from various booktubers talking about it, and the concept of it really piqued my interest. I've heard it compared a lot to the premise of Event Horizon, which is an interesting and pretty cool movie, so that hooked me right away. And part of my goal starting this channel was to get into more science fiction, and in hearing about that and in knowing that a fellow booktuber wrote this, I added it quickly to my list and received it as a gift. So this will be one that I'll definitely get into in 2022, probably in early 22, and would love to talk about on the channel because it sounds really cool, and I'm looking forward to sharing my thoughts on it with all of you. Next up, we have a pretty popular indie book that has been making the rounds on BookTube. I bought this one for myself actually as the Christmas gift to myself. I've been meaning to buy this for a while, and recently I actually won the audiobook in a giveaway contest, but wanted to buy the actual physical book as well to support the authors. And that's Seasons of Albaddon by Elon Marche and Christopher Warman. So I first heard of this book from Steve Talks Books and Stuff. He was talking about a bunch of different fantasy books and kind of explaining what he liked about them. And this one came up and sounded very interesting, and the fact that it was written by people within this community, the BookTube indie community, I was super excited about it and quickly added it to my list. So I believe this is a short story collection or a collection of novellas that take place within this created world that the authors have made. I haven't read too many fantasy short story collections. I've read the first 2 Witcher short story collections, I believe actually the only 2, but the ones that came before the actual novels in the series. I really enjoyed those, but that's really it for my experience in fantasy short stories. It was actually part of my December TBR, but considering we only have a couple days left in the year, and I'm still working through Battleground, the most recent book of the Dresden Files, I don't know if I'll have enough time to get into this before the 1st of January, but if not, this will just have to be my first book of 2022. Next up, we have Nocturne by H.B. Diaz. This is another one that I heard a lot about. It's a horror short story collection, and it's very short. It's a very thin book. So in this case, as opposed to what I usually do with the short story collections where I'll just pick out one at a time. I might read this all the way through. And I've heard about this book from other booktubers. Steve Talks Books and stuff talked about it and gave it good reviews. Ursi from Cersei's Book also talked about this and also made it sound really great and something that I would definitely enjoy. So I bought this for myself along with Seasons of Albaddon in the same little haul there. And I would definitely like to get into this in the beginning part of 2022 as well. And the last in this book haul is another horror short story collection that's an indie book from within this community and one I've heard a lot of great things about. And this one I bought on Kindle, and that's Mists and Megaliths by Catherine McCarthy. This is another horror short story collection that I've seen pop up a lot in the booktube community, and I actually watched the author interview that Steve Talks Books and stuff did with Catherine McCarthy. And the way the horror in this book was described is quiet horror, and that's something I never really encountered before as a term for a subgenre of horror. And I believe it's just understated, more somber and character-focused internal horror rather than big explosive action-y horror. And I believe all these short stories take place in Wales, where the author is from, so that'll be a nice change of scenery for me, having read horror that usually just takes place in the States. So that's another one that I'll definitely get into in the beginning part of 2022 and hopefully talk about my thoughts here. So I have a bonus category here, and I left it last because I don't know if people in the booktube community really read much of these, but these are cookbooks and I have a couple here I want to talk about. So the first book I have here is For the Love of Cheese by Afram Pristine. So this is a cheese-filled cookbook that was made by the Cheese Boutique, which is a cheese store in Toronto near where I'm from. I haven't made a lot of cheese dishes in the past, I guess outside of pizza, and I flipped through here and saw some really delicious looking stuff and can't wait to make them. And the second of my cookbooks and the last in this haul is Avatar: The Last Airbender, the official cookbook. So this is a cookbook, as it says on the cover, that was inspired by the food that was eaten in the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is one of my favorite shows. There's a lot of very interesting and very diverse food that is shown in the show that of course was inspired by dishes from Asian culture. And this cookbook takes those kind of mixes and blends that the show makes into their food and tries to make them come alive. And I've seen some very funny and interesting recipes in here, like fire flakes, and of course there's a whole section on tea that hopefully Uncle Iroh would be proud of. And there's a lot of inside jokes about stuff in the show, like there's a cabbage recipe and cactus juice. So I'll definitely have to try those out and hopefully they turn out well. So that's it for my holiday book haul. There was quite a bit here, a bit more than I usually do, but that's because it was Christmas and I finally didn't have to buy books only for myself. But I did so anyway. I went to a used bookstore like I do once a month, and if I don't, my head will explode. So that's why I have used books here along with the ones I got for Christmas. So in the comments, let me know if you got any interesting books for Christmas, and if you don't celebrate Christmas, let me know if you've picked up anything good recently. And if you have read some of these, let me know your thoughts on them. I'm very curious to know what you thought about some of these, and I'm very excited to talk about the indie books I received here, hopefully in reviews coming out on the channel in the next couple of months. So before you go, remember to do all the YouTube stuff like liking and subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching. Please remember to support your local library, and I'll see you next time.